Welcome to the debate. We are confronting a rapidly accelerating reality, a reality that is creating a severe, near-term crisis for our entire modern infrastructure.
That's right. We're seeing a collision between the immense, just exponential energy appetite of artificial intelligence and, at the same time, this urgent global push toward full electrification of everything else, transport, industry, you name it. And this conflict is putting an unsustainable demand on our power grids that, frankly, have always been fragile.
Indeed. And this crisis really demands that we stop relying on a kind of engineering hubris and actually start confronting these deep, uncomfortable warnings. Thinkers like Douglass Carmichael, who insisted that our ability to adapt to threats like climate instability is vastly overestimated. He argued that we need structural, systemic change, not just bigger batteries.
Exactly. So the core question we have to wrestle with, it's fundamental. Should the primary solution to this immediate crisis of competing energy demands, prioritize, on one hand, massive centralized technological deployment and innovative efficiency?
Or must we accept a more radical course? Localized societal adaptation and a real reduction in energy consumption.
I hold the position that only rapid technological acceleration, massive centralized investment in disruptive innovation, that's the only thing that can scale quickly enough to meet this challenge without, catastrophic societal upheaval. We have to engineer our way out of this.
And I argue the opposite. That very reliance on centralized technological fixes only makes the problem worse. It exacerbates the inherent fragility and the extractive nature of the system. Given the immediate constraints on the grid and Carmichael's pretty dire assessment, I think fundamental societal reduction and embracing community resilience are really the only paths to actual security.
I see the only viable path forward in a massive, widespread technological transformation, one that's driven by capital and ingenuity. I mean, the feasibility of full electrification, it's been rigorously analyzed. When you actually look at the material budgets necessary, and this is a strategy championed by figures like Sal Griffith, the math shows that it is physically possible within the necessary environmental boundaries. Now, critics often focus on the upfront carbon cost of building all this new infrastructure. And yes, mitigating activity causes emissions at first. Carmichael often noted that about, the carbon cost of climate conferences. But we have to recognize the potential for disruptive innovation. Think of Tony Seba's analysis of discontinuous change, the shift from horses to cars in Manhattan. That took 10 years. It was driven by a completely superior technology. We are sitting at a similar inflection point right now, where scale and speed can overcome those old limitations.
I come at it from a different way. That focus on centralized scale and rapid deployment is precisely the source of our vulnerability. The core problem, and this is what James Burke illuminated so well in his analysis of the 1965 Northeast blackout, it isn't just that the power stopped. It's the inherent fragility of a technological life support system that's built on hyper-specialization and interconnectedness. When that massive grid failed, it became impossible for millions of people. They lacked the generalized knowledge and autonomy to survive without it. Scaling the technological solution, as you propose, just means building a bigger, more complex system that is inherently more vulnerable to a single-point failure.
The technology is evolving to address that fragility. We are already seeing AI infrastructure providers developing systems designed for extreme efficiency and resilience. I mean, for instance, companies like Microsoft are designing zero-net energy in zero-net water data centers. They do this through highly advanced heat recapture systems, liquid cooling, drastically lowering the energy required for cooling, which is, a massive operational cost for AI. Future systems will be orders of magnitude more efficient, and that will render the current catastrophic demand projections obsolete. The financial and social benefits of achieving that kind of energy abundance, especially in a redesigned system, it far outweighs the cost of the initial investment.
You see, the promise of a future 10 times more efficient data center it's cold comfort when we look at the immediate, present reality of energy shortfalls. Douglass Carmichael's insistence on addressing the climate crisis was so painful precisely because it required accepting that we must cut back on everything. We have to embrace a profound lowering of our standard of living, And that was a phrase he used to challenge our reliance on consumption. Societal solutions have to focus on local, community-based resiliency, creating what George Paul called islands of coherence. These localized systems of self-sufficiency that can actually function when the centralized grid fails. Relying on profit-driven, centralized tech systems to satisfy fundamental needs is, well, it's futile. The base of the pyramid economic theory suggests the system will always distort its solutions to maximize shareholder profit. It often fails to serve the basic necessities of the least powerful.
I see why you draw on those historical critiques, but we cannot afford to wait for some fundamental societal mindset shift while the energy demands of AI are doubling every 6 months. The issue isn't capacity in the long run, it's deployment speed now.
I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that. Let me tell you why. That optimistic technological timeline, it fundamentally ignores the immediate, hard reality of competing energy demands. We're not talking about long-term material budgets, we're talking about what needs to be plugged in tomorrow. Current industry projections suggest a shortfall of 30 gigawatts of electricity by 2030. That's the equivalent capacity of 30 large nuclear power plants, just to keep pace with AI and electric vehicles. The AI race right now, it isn't governed by who has the best chips, it's governed by who can secure access to reliable, abundant electricity. And logistically, historically, politically, building 30 nuclear equivalents in 6 years it's nearly impossible in Western democracies. That, right there, is the point of failure. We're accelerating demand faster than we can solve the clean production problem.
But that shortfall projection, it relies on a linear, past-based model of deployment and efficiency. I contend that current projections consistently underestimate two critical factors: the exponential rate of renewable penetration and technological leapfrogging. You cite the 30 gigawatt shortfall, right? But that assumes current data center thermodynamics. If, as I suggested, 10 times more efficient data centers become the standard, using advanced heat capture, reducing the cooling load to almost zero, implementing liquid immersion, that projection is instantly cut by a factor of 10. And we have to integrate advanced load shifting. AI processing doesn't have to be instantaneous. A lot of it can be deferred to operate during off-peak power times, effectively using energy that would otherwise just be wasted. The constraint isn't technical capacity, it's political will, it's deployment speed. We could, if the U.S. chose, follow a rapid path toward becoming an electro-state, a state defined by massive state-directed investment in electrical infrastructure, similar to the speed and scale we see in China.
Focusing purely on the engineering solution still ignores the systemic fragility that Burke warned about. We're just rebuilding a bigger, more complex, and more centralized trap that requires more specialization and less generalized knowledge to maintain. The idea of the electrostate simply exchanges one form of fragility for another. Its dependency on a central authority that's capable of massive, rapid deployment. What happens when that central authority or its system fails?
I acknowledge the reality of the technological trap that Burke described, but retreat from the system is simply impossible for 8 billion people today. I mean, even the localized resilient systems you champion, modernized, regenerative farms, for example, they rely on electricity for sensors, for tools, for supply chain communication. The path to resilience has to be through redesigning the existing system, not retreating from it into some 19th century subsistence model. This means aligning economic activity with environmental soundness, like monetizing ESG benefits.
Okay, but what does that actually mean?
I'm talking specifically about instruments like soil health credits or biodiversity credits. By creating financial markets that incentivize environmental stewardship instead of extraction, we can redesign the economic mechanisms themselves. This allows the system to fund resilience and sustainability, moving beyond the zero-sum game you seem to be suggesting.
But the economic narrative itself is fundamentally flawed, and that dictates the outcome of those incentives, no matter how clever they are. We have to address the extraction that's just baked into the foundations of modern capital. Look at the historical irony. Adam Smith's Wealth of Nations was written while Glasgow thrived on tobacco, cotton, and sugar, all economic activities rooted in the enslavement of people, a fact Smith conveniently ignored.
Today, our technological solutions often reinforce central control and dependency in a very similar way, funneling profits and power to the few. If the UK proposes a new battery tax for EVs, that infrastructure tax instantly becomes another subscription to the state. It actively prevents the local autonomy and self-sufficiency you would need to survive a grid collapse. It reinforces a dependency model where we're forced to pay a central authority for the privilege of using their centralized tech.
I'm not convinced by that line of reasoning, because it sets up a false dichotomy that ethical profit and sustainability are mutually exclusive. We can't just wish central control away. We have to leverage the power of markets to shift behavior. Your examples of historical extraction, they're valid, but they define capitalism by its worst excesses, and they ignore its capacity for reform and redirection. Designing a system where large-scale companies find more profit, less risk, better brand by being radically sustainable, well, that proves the supposed conflict between making money or making sense is a false dichotomy. It's perpetuated by outdated capitalist frameworks. We can embed the cost of externalities into the business model.
I think we are missing Carmichael's deeper philosophical challenge here. The necessary change is a mindset shift about what we even define as progress. We are discussing the long-term survival of human society, not optimizing quarterly returns with creative financing. We've culturally associated high material consumption and therefore massive energy use with a good standard of living. That's a narrative we inherited from the Industrial Revolution. It's not a necessity. When sociologists studied communities that lost constant technological dependence, like in Cuba during the special period after the Soviet Union collapsed, the standard of living was redefined. It became based on community connection, local food production, physical health, human happiness, not kilowatt hours or the latest gadget. Carmichael compels us to see that the association of high consumption with high well-being is a cultural pathology.
That vision, while compelling philosophically, it requires a level of mass displacement and forced suffering that is, I think, morally questionable for people who have built their lives around modern systems. You're drawing parallels to the most brutal moments of technological shifts, the sudden impoverishment caused by the mechanical loom, or the violence of the enclosure acts, which brutally displace human labor. We have to ensure our current technological shift toward AI and electrification doesn't cause that same kind of forced suffering by deliberately imposing a lower standard of living.
I would argue that suffering is already inherent in the system's fragility and in the inevitable climate instability that your technological acceleration will struggle to prevent. The risk is that if we prioritize centralized, complex technology without preparing society for its failure, a grid collapse becomes an extinction-level event. Carmichael's position compels us to embrace intellectual humility, to prepare for lower consumption now, to focus on self-sufficiency in the communities that will be most vulnerable when the centralized systems fail. Resilience is preparation, dependency is a gamble on infallibility.
The crisis demands a singular focus on the immense possibilities enabled by disruptive innovation, the capacity for massive, rapid electrification, zero-carbon computing, and intelligent system redesign. The risk of retreat or of insufficient ambition, of waiting for a profound mindset shift while energy demands skyrocket is far, far greater than the challenge of building a smarter, cleaner technological infrastructure. We have the engineering capacity to solve the power problem cleanly and at scale. We just need the political and economic will to deploy it, quickly and strategically.
And technological solutions consistently address symptoms, while increasing systemic fragility and centralization. Douglass Carmichael's pessimism, while it's difficult to hear, it serves as a necessary check on our technological hubris. True resilience requires a profound questioning of the foundational economic assumptions that led us to the state of energy dependency in the first place, and it requires prioritizing community self-sufficiency over reliance on a single vulnerable grid. We can't afford to treat the grid as an unquestioned life support system that is guaranteed never to fail. We have to make communities capable of creating their own islands of coherence.
The value of this discussion is clear. The debate hinges entirely on whether humanity can successfully engineer its way out of this crisis through rapid, centralized transformation.
Or if the system itself is structurally broken,
necessitating a fundamental change in how we define survival and progress, and whether we choose to confront the hard lessons of history, the systemic flaws embedded in every large-scale, profit-driven solution we have ever designed, before the lights go out.